Thank you very much. Well, I'll get started then. I'll just turn on my chronometer so I have some sense of time. And all right, so let's get started. Today I will bring you guys the presentation that I put together. This presentation is about how to use the new Sitecore 9 dynamic placeholders to build a grid system components. Basically, we're going to cover some topics of some general topics about the new Sitecore dynamic placeholders and demonstrate how that can be used in a simple implementation of a grid system. Okay. All right. So let's get started. A little bit about myself. My name is Rodrigo Peplau. For those who doesn't know me, I'm working as a solution architect with Sitecore since 2010. At the beginning as a dev, of course. I've been working now to Niche Tech. I've been a technologist MVP since 2016, and a proud member of the Go Horse team that won hackathon last year in the data exchange framework. And we are planning to at least deploy something this year, just like the same expectation that we had the last year. All right, so a little bit about the agenda. This is the agenda. We will start talk a bit about Sitecore 9 Dynamics placeholder, about the grid system implementation that I put together, about dynamic placeholder parameters and how that's used in the implementation, a little bit about the bootstrap grids, how that works, and how the grid system works for content editors, and how the implementation itself has been done. And also in the end, I will bring to you guys a couple use cases. Okay. So, all right. So Sitecore 9 dynamic placeholders. Uh, in the past, before Sitecore 9, that's before Sitecore 9, A2 and previous, you only had the placeholder helper for inserting placeholders. And that has its limitations. Basically, by using the old placeholder, you can only have a single placeholder in the same rendering. And if you have multiple renderings with the same placeholder ID or key, you also have problems because Sitecore will get confused and will not know where that rendering should be. Before Sitecore 9, a dynamic placeholder already existed, but it was not out of the box. It was implementations from our community. There are several implementations. Most of you know at least one flavor. But now in Sitecore 9, it has been introduced the native one. So now you can have the same key everywhere, and that's really handy. Dynamic placeholders means that, like I said, the same key can be used across different renderings and within the same rendering. And you can build functionality that generates, that's the second bullet, is the most important. You can build functionality that generate multiple placeholders within the same rendering dynamically. So basically, one thing that dynamic placeholder, any of the community's implementation didn't do, and the new one does, is that you can create multiple entries of placeholders, and that's especially useful for the grid system where we want to create like 3 columns, 2 columns, 4 columns. That's all dynamic. Well, a bit of how the grid system is implemented. It uses the new dynamic placeholders that I mentioned. It's based on the Sitecore 9 update 1, the most updated, the most recent version. It is component based. It is compatible with Bootstrap grids. It supports responsive and unresponsive designs. and gives the content editor these components that they can use and add to to the placeholders. These renders to be added to placeholders. Sorry. So here you can see that you have like a simple container, single column, 2 columns, 3 columns. There are just some examples. And the most important, it is open source. And we are accepting contributions. Go ahead if you want and do a branch. You'll be welcome. And I'm excited to see your pull requests, okay? Yeah, like I said, it's open source. So, and that's like a dilemma, I would say, because Sitecore is not a free platform, but our community is doing free software all the time. Because ideas, good ideas, comes from the community itself. Most good ideas can come from there. Like that dynamic placeholder itself, it's a great example of good ideas that came from open source. You know, some people, some companies also have free versions of their products, but apparently when they cut it, people get angry. I'm not sure if you guys knew about Octopus, that they are discontinuing the free community version. So like you can see here, people are not exactly happy with that. What a shame, Octopus. That can be tell that, you know, that Octopus is behind grids, if you know what I mean. But that only happens, you know, because people love you, Octopus. Okay, that's just a warning that this presentation will not make fun of people using web forms in 2018. So, because Dynamics Placeholder does not support anything but MVC. So you should use MVC, okay? All right, so a little bit about dynamic placeholders parameters. When you declare a dynamic placeholder like this one, you will, first thing you add is the key itself, and then you can pass some parameters to it. This is one of the overloads, and this accepts the placeholder name, the count, the max count, and the seed number. Basically, by doing this, you will automatically have Sitecore creating 2 placeholders for you. If you added 3 instead of 2 in the second parameter, it will be 3. So basically, this will render this. Basically, you see here 1 placeholders, 2 placeholders, right? A second overload is this. This is a little bit more I would say flexible, because this will allow you to attach a function, a method to your placeholder. So basically, when you do this, you can declare a method as you're seeing here. So basically, this is your view, okay? You're declaring here the dynamic placeholder, and then you're declaring a function. My function here is called create wrapper function. And then you can declare the function in the view itself that will receive, in this case, the HTML string, which is the HTML of the placeholder itself. And basically what my example here is doing is just adding a simple div outside of it. So what I'm doing is creating the div, adding the placeholder inside the div using the inner HTML property, and then returning this to Sitecore. Okay, so by doing that, I will, as you can see, I am injecting a div surrounding the placeholder, right? I will advise you guys to, if you're curious, to have a look at this link, because this is the official documentation and it brings a lot of different overloads for you to see. But the 2 overloads that I showed here are the 2 that my implementation is using. Still about placeholders parameters, we can also pass parameters using Sitecore to inside the rendering. And we do that by adding a template, a parameter template. We actually can do that without the parameter template by only using the edit rendering properties, but that's not user-friendly. So by doing this, you see that this example is from our left Rail container. You see that there are two keywords here. It starts with ph, because let me just go ahead here. Yeah, it starts with ph, telling that I want to insert inside a placeholder, and then I type the key of the placeholder, which in this case is the grid column placeholder. The 0 that you see here means that is the first placeholder, and that one is the second placeholder. And finally, we have the attribute that I want to inject, which in this case is column CSS classes. By doing that, as you can see here in the lower part of the screen, you will be able in Experience Editor to have this nice button and to select the CSS classes that you want to use, either in column 1 and column 2. That way you'll be able to inject multiple classes, CSS classes, and that will render something similar to what you're seeing here. So that's 2 columns with a left rail. Okay, a little bit of Bootstrap grids. So Bootstrap grids are really simple. Basically, this is the markup for a CSS grid. You have an outer container. You have a div class row, which represents a row. And you have a col, which represents a column. And of course, if you want multiple columns, you should add multiple col classes, div classes, inside the row. So we will have something just like this. Okay. Also, this example will show that we are using different column sizes for the three columns that I have. Basically, the middle one is col 6. This is totally Bootstrap. So the col 6 means that it should take 50% of the grid. Basically, Bootstrap divides your available space in 12. So when you say 6, it means 50%. And the other 2 columns will arrange properly with a free space left, and they do that equally. There's also the responsiveness. If you look at this link, it's showing how to do responsiveness. Basically, it's also easy. What you do is, instead of just adding col something, you add col and MD and these keywords. MD means medium device. If you add SD, means small device. If you add XD, it's extra small device. Basically, that's the way that you set this to be responsive. In this example, the first example, will show MD8 for when you have a medium device, but for all the other devices, it will show just a col. And that's the way we are using grids, Bootstrap grids, to be responsible. Okay, so how the implementation works. Of course, I have renderings. Like I said, there's no surprise. I will have some renderings there because it's component-based. The renderings will inject the basic markup around the placeholders to do the Bootstrap grids. And of course, multiple renderings can be nested inside each other. So you can, that way, build complex page layouts. that can be responsible or not, responsive or not. This is the Bootstrap container. The Bootstrap container is it's meant to be used as a main wrapper for grids. It's part of the Bootstrap grid system, and basically our component will render this div with a class container and a placeholder inside. Here are some of the rows and columns containers. So each of these components will give you a kind of grid. Of course, the single container, as you can guess, it will show you the single column container will show just one column with a placeholder inside. And all the other components will be able to, like you see here, to build different grids. Like I said, they can be nested inside each other with not problem. And when you are in Experience Editor and you add one of these components, you have these two icons that you see here highlighted. The first is the replace component that will enable you to replace this component. In this case, you're showing a single column container. You can make it, transform it into a 50-50 or left rail, right rail, a 3 column, so on and so forth. And also you can switch back to the unresponsive version of this component. So you can make it unresponsive. And you have the second icon, which is edit grid properties. And this is where you select how your grid should looks like. So you can hide the row, you can select different classes for the row and for the column, And when you're done selecting, you save it, and your page will look like the way you set up. Like I said before, when you are trying to replace a component, you'll be able to replace it by one of the other components that we have available, but also by the unresponsive version of that component. And when you switch to the unresponsive version, unresponsive mode, all you see is unresponsive versions of the other components. So you have 50-50 unresponsive, left rail unresponsive, and that way, so you can keep the context for content users, content editors. How the CSS class injection works. So we have these classes, these items that we created. They are all under the Sitecore system modules grids. And basically they store CSS classes to be injected. And when we define our parameter templates, we define a source and we point to that root that has these classes. And that way you have that populated. It's important to observe that Sitecore does not support rendering parameters with spaces. So what we do when we define the parameter templates is that we're naming the fields without spaces, but we're adjusting display name and title fields to have the friendly name. So they will have a look and feel like you're seeing here. And the parameters are, are assigned to each of the components, to each of the renderings in the parameter template field, as you see here. So this is an example of the simple container setup. Okay, the simple container rendering. Sorry, one up. Well, the simple container rendering, like I said, it's meant to be used as a main container. And the implementation it's basically a render that has this path. It's pointing to one of the couple views that we have. Yes, we are building the whole grid system with only a couple views. And this one is pointing to the simple container view. The parameter templates is the simple container parameter. And we have standard values for that. And the content, the experience editor button here is something that we customize. So the button is better positioned instead of the native one that is really not easy to find. And here is quickly, I will show you quickly the view. So this view is the one that implements the simple container. I will go in details through each of these lines. So basically the view has just the dynamic placeholder grid container and the create wrapper method. And I will go through the whole method. So it's a start, as you can see, with the declaration of the method. And we are having these two parameters. They are important for us. The first one is has the HTML for the placeholder. And the second one has the context of the dynamic placeholder that I am. And by using that, I can get specific properties for I can pass parameters for my placeholder. In the simple container, we only have one, but remember in the others, this will be actually a loop. So this method will be called multiple times. Here I am using a method that we created to get the parameter, the hide container parameter. So basically it's just a Boolean, and I am getting whatever the user said that to be hidden, and it will be true or false. This method is available at the provider. So the get parameter, that's the one that we implemented as well. You have a raw value, a raw like a string value, and a typecast value that you can have it. And you have this variation as well. So basically the first I am passing the the context is the dynamic placeholder context, and the second is the rendering item. They are used to different things. The first one I am using to inside the placeholder to get a parameter, and the second one is used to get a parameter from the rendering item itself. And this is the code where I am, just checking if it's to be hidden, the container. And also I'm checking if it's in experience editor because I don't want to break it. These two lines, I am creating the div that will be the container div of the placeholder. And in line 28, you see that I have this getting line classes. This is also one method that I'm just using to get the classes that the user selected, so I can inject them into the div that I'm creating. And quickly, here I am just adding the placeholder inside the div that I just created, and I'm passing that. Well, the rest of the implementation, I will not go through in much details because they are pretty common, but I will show how the multiple column, the view itself works. Again, this view is the only view that we use to any number of columns from 1 to infinite. We'll have all the other components we use it. The view will start retrieving the number of columns that we set up, because now we need to, in the renderings itself, we need to tell how many columns I want to render. And this is the secret to have just a single view with multiple components. So here I am getting the number of columns, and I am just doing a default to 2. And like you guys can see here, this is the rendering, and this is where I place the number of columns that I want. So obviously, if I go to 50-50, you see columns 2. If you go to 3 columns, you see columns 3. And this is the piece of code where I'm getting that. Uh, okay, so we start the view again, adding a dynamic placeholder, adding the method that will inject the divs, and the number of columns that we got earlier. So this is the view. I will go again in details. These two lines that you see, let me get back again. These two lines that you see here, they are, needed because, again, this is a loop. So I need to know in the line 24 and 25 if this is the first or the last column. If I am in a single column container, I will be at the same time in the first and the last column. So it's just one. And going ahead, sorry. The first and last column, like I said. These lines, line 29, I'm getting just, again, creating our div. Again, remember this is a loop, so it's one for each of the columns. Line 30, I am adding the classes to my div, to my row div. And in the line 32, I am adding again the placeholder to that container that I recently created. In line 35, everything goes to the output. Okay, this block, I am, just creating the row HTML because like you guys saw previously, in Bootstrap, you have a row and columns inside the row. So this line, 37 to 44, I am injecting the opening div for the row. Again, getting the inline classes for it. We're also taking care of hiding and showing accordingly. And here in line 46, 47, we are in the last column, we close the div. Basically, we close the row here. Well, guys, that's pretty much it. So those two rows, those two views, with those you can easily build all that components. And this is just a table that I have in this article. And I would like you, if you would like to have a look. But basically, this is just showing each of the components that I have, what view it does use, what number of columns it uses, what the parameter templates, and the classes that we are injecting for each of the columns. Okay. All right. So now that you guys know how the grid system works, the implementation works, I would like to bring you a couple use cases. Okay. So we will basically implement this, and as you will be able to see, this will use will require no compilation, right? So the first use case is just an about rendering. As you can see here, it has a title, it has a text, and a download button. So this is the markup that we are going to implement. And I am going to show you how we are building that with grids only. Basically, the opening div, the section div, will use a simple container customized. The second one is a simple container native out of the box. This block that you see here is a rich text. Again, here we have a left column, a left rail container with two columns. And you see that inside of each of the two columns, I have two rich texts. As well as this block, this is also rich text. Okay. All right, so let's do it. So this is my site core. I will start by creating an empty page for us. by duplicating this, and I'll call it about. Okay. Next, let me see if I can decrease. No, just that. Next, I will create a couple classes because this div requires some customization. So let me just get there. The class I will create, I would just call about banner. The content that I will add to it is the content that I grabbed from, is the class that I grabbed from the markup. Okay. So now we are getting back to the new item that I just created, and I will add that in Experience Editor. Okay. Pretty simple, has only one placeholder. And I will start by adding a simple container. So this is the first simple container. I will select the about banner class that I just created. I will add about to the ID. And I will change it to section. So that way, as you see, it already starts to look as my example. Okay, I'll save it. Next, I would add another simple container inside. But this time it's just a native one, so I don't need to change anything. Okay, so now I will add a rich text component inside of here. Let's wait for this to load. I promise I did all the sacrifices to the demo gods. All right, so
The demo gods were nice to me. They will be to you as well, Rodrigo.
So the new rich text that I'm creating, I will call it about top, and I will drop a content that I just grabbed from my template, from my markup. Okay, it starts looking good. Next, I need two more classes to my two columns that I need to add here. So I'll get back here and add two multi-column columns, and I'll create a couple classes here. About column left, which will have these markup. And I'm just lazy. About column right, which will have this. Okay. So let's get back to Experience Editor and add one more container here. This time I will add the left rail container, and I will change some things here. I will change column 1. I will remove this and add about column left, and column 2 about column right. As you can see, it starts to look like the markup. So I will add another 2 rich text editors, rich text blocks inside of each of the 2 columns. So I'll start with the first one. I'll call it column 1. And here, the second column, column 2. Each of these will have their own markup. Right? Of course, I'm here doing a lot of usage of rich text blocks. In a real life, you of course build your own components instead of just using rich text, but it's just for your demonstration. And finally, I need one more rich text in the end. Rich text. Guess what? All right. Okay, so this is it. Now, if I switch to preview, there is our about component. Like you can see, it has been totally built just with the grid system and the rich text. Right. So the second use case, we will also implement a footer with 3 columns. I forgot to mention that the 2 use cases are based in this Bootstrap template. Okay, and this one has, as you can see, 3 columns with 3 rich text editors inside. This is the markup. I guess even more simpler. Has a simple container outside with some classes. Has a simple container inside native. Has a 3 columns container with rich text inside each of the 3 placeholders. So let's do it again. Okay, so I will start by adding again some classes, and that's becoming a little boring, I know, because it's all you have to do. You don't need to compile anything else. Okay, so the first one is in the container itself. I will create a new one here in the container. I will call this class footer. This is just a friendly name, of course. And here is the class that this will inject. Next, I will add a new container. So I will add it again, get back to Experience Editor, and I'll add it. And I'll add here a new simple container. Okay, what I will add here is I will remove container and select the footer class that I just created. And the HTML tag, it should be footer because it's a footer. Okay, and I guess that's it. So click OK and save it. As you can see, it's already looking like blue and everything because it has the classes that we injected. Continue. I will add a new simple container. Again, this one is just a native one. And now is where, well, let me just save here because I need to create some classes. Back to content editor. Acho que eu fiz errado. I think I did this wrong, but I'll follow my script anyway. So I'll call this footer 3 columns. And this is my class. Okay, so now that next thing I would do is to create 2 classes to show we can replace. No, I would not. I would jump this. I'll just go here and add 3 classes. Oh yeah, maybe it's a good idea to add just a 2 first, only to show that I can switch to a 3 easily. Okay, so now that is selected, I can, oops, click at the wrong button. I can select yeah, like I said, I added that to the wrong place. Let me save it. And I will move it to the columns folder. This is where it's supposed to be. Yeah. I'll just refresh the page. And okay, so now we'll be able to select footer 3 columns. And I will save it. Okay. Okay, now we have our 3 columns. It's easy. Everything we need to do is to create 3 rich text editors, rich text blocks, I'm sorry. And I'm just cleaning up some things here before I can do it. So there you go. It's a rich text. It's a new one. All right. Last but not least, in each of the 3 columns, I will paste some markup again. That will be all we need to do to compile these two components. We just paste some markup here. All right. Well, that's it. So now I will switch back to preview mode so you can see it how the page looks. Right? Well, so those are the two use cases. As you can see, the thing is fully functional. For now, it's just rich text, of course. But the most important is that you could build everything with just the grid system and a couple rich texts. Well, so I guess that's all I got. I would like to know if anyone has any questions. Let me know. I would like to reinforce that everything you see here is open source. I will add the link to the YouTube video, as well as this presentation will be there as well. So waiting for your checkout, your pull request, and let me know if you have any questions.
That's very cool, Rodrigo. I have one question for you. So you're using Bootstrap. How difficult would that be to use a different grid-based framework like Zurb Foundation, for example?
Okay, you remember that I mentioned the two views that we're creating. Everything you will be probably have to do is to implement the two views again, so they are speeding the correct markup, as well as the classes that we're injecting. I'm not sure. I don't know all the grid frameworks out there. Honestly speaking, not sure if all them are based in classes as we are seeing. But if you're all based in classes and markups, just like Bootstrap, it's totally doable.
Cool. Thank you.
And also, there is an improvement for this grid system now in the new version that I'm going to check in the next days. You'll be able to select not just a div for the grids, but also any kind of tag, HTML tag, and also be able to hide rows and columns if you want. So if you want to break Bootstrap, probably to implement something else, that's also possible. All right, I guess, okay, one more question here.
So Jamie Ken is asking, does making a grid system so flexible also mean that it is too flexible for the users? And you, as an example, you would want placeholder restrictions to guide users to what they can add to sections of their page?
That's a great question. Thanks for that. I would like to answer that with this. The grid itself, as it is, I agree, it is not much user-friendly. You will like to use other features of Sitecore to trim it down a little bit. For instance, for insert options, you have the ability to use insert options rules, and that's highly suggested. So you can, have different allowed controls. I mentioned insert options, but they are allowed controls. So there are implementations out there, so you can use rules to define allowed controls. That will allow you, for instance, to have the same placeholder from the grid system in different pages, having different allowed controls inside. I have that code as well, and I plan to put that available somewhere because it's really useful. Other than that, I also recommend when you're using grid system like this, especially when your grid system has customizations, classes that you have selected, that are not the out of the box, that you use some kind of composite aggregation, what in SXA they call that the global partial layout. Yeah, partial layouts. We have an implementation in Nishtech. We call it composite blocks. Basically, that will easy the insertion of multiple nested components, like multiple components, multiple grids, one inside the other, and that eases it's easier for the user then. Okay, we have that button, that custom button. Then it's a little better than the native one, but it's still not that thing. So for these things, I suggest using the composite blocks or partial layouts and the allowed controls rules as well. I like that question. Thanks, Jimmy. I'm just giving a couple minutes for any other question. One thing that I would like to highlight, guys, is when in this grid system, when you see that we, in the parameter templates that we set the path to the classes, we did that hard-coded. But I also recommend that you implement some kind of dynamic lookup for that, so you can have different classes for different websites. We have that implemented as well in Nishtech, and it's working pretty fine. Well, I guess if nothing else appears, I will finish my presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for all the audience online and here local.